Hello, brothers and sisters in Christ. Thank you for joining the livingprolife.com conference. My name is Father Leo Patalinghug, host and founder of Plating Grace, an international food and faith movement, and host of the TV show Savoring Our Faith on EWTN. And I'm grateful and proud to collaborate with this conference alongside of CatholicSpeakers.com, the largest Catholic speaking network and leader in pro-life speaking and events around the world. And tonight we're blessed to have with us Professor Janet Smith. I'll give her introduction right before we bring her on. But for all of those joining us, if you haven't already done so, would like to invite you to participate in everything we have to offer with this conference by purchasing the VIP package. We've done everything we could to prepare you with all the resources you need to fight for life by equipping you with over 50 pro-life presentations and by keeping costs as low as possible. For $30, you will have access to 20 plus hours of pro-life content addressing every issue you can think of regarding the pro-life issues, and more importantly, providing you information with formation so that you can respond to the attacks that come from this culture of death and pro-abortion mentality. We want to take this opportunity not only to unify during the times that we're in for the fight of our life at all stages, but to prepare you with formation from the leading experts around the world. So to get access and to register for the VIP package, and also to get the parish license fee if you are in charge of a parish, which allows you to share this message with every parishioner, go to livingprolife.com. And so now I'd like to take the moment to welcome and introduce our panelists tonight, Professor Janet Smith. Um, Professor Smith recently retired from the Father McGivney Chair of Life Ethics at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, Michigan. She is the author of Humani Vitae, A Generation Later, and A Right to Privacy. Her volume, entitled Self-Gift, contains her previously published essays on Humani Vitae and the thoughts of John Paul II, our saint. She edited Why Humani Vitae is Right, A Leader, Life Issues, Medical Choice with Christopher Kazer, Living the Truth in Love, Pastoral Approaches to Same-Sex Attractions with Father Paul Check, and Why Humani Vitae is Still Right, a reader with 21 essays by various authors. More than 2 million copies of her talk, Contraception, Why Not?, has been distributed around the world. Professor Smith served 3 terms as a consultor to the Pontifical Council of the Family and 8 years on the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission, the third. And she authors a regular column for the National Catholic Register and has appeared on Geraldo, Fox Morning News, CNN International, CNN Newsroom, Al Jazeera, and EWTN, among many others. Professor Smith has received 3 honorary doctorates and several awards for her scholarship and service. And so it's a pleasure to welcome Professor Smith to our panel discussion on living pro-life. Thank you for joining us, Professor.
Oh, it's very good to be here. I'm very impressed with what you're doing with this conference and honored to be a part of it.
Well, I'm taking notes because I definitely think that there's a lot that we can learn from your experience. And I just want to jump into this and reminding all of the listeners and viewers that we're trying to provide formation. How do we take the information that we know from science and history and our faith and make it so that you can be more effective witnesses? So, Professor Smith, the first thing I'd like to do is just ask you personally, how did you get involved in speaking up for life? And it always begins with fighting the contraceptive mentality. What was it that got you so interested in this cause?
Yeah, I'm glad we're doing this a bit. I am getting to be one of the very senior members of the pro-life movement. And I do think sometimes it's good for young people to hear the history of how it is we got involved and what has happened in the movement. I graduated from high school in 1968, and it is people are stunned at this, but I never heard of abortion until I went to college. And the only way I heard of abortion in college was that there were some women coming to campus. I was going to a school called Grinnell College in Iowa, which was a very radical school then, and it's even more radical now. And there were women coming to campus who wanted us to write letters to liberalize the abortion law. And I had been raised Catholic. I never went to Catholic schools, but my parents had us receive all the sacraments. And I had left the church, though, for a brief period of time, going off to college, thinking it was something you left at home. And didn't know what abortion was, honestly. So I went to the library and I looked up abortion. And I was shocked because my mother had had a couple babies when I was in my early teens, and I just loved babies. And I just couldn't believe women would do this. And I noted there that it said the Catholic Church was opposed to abortion. And I found that interesting. I wasn't necessarily, obviously, a devout Catholic at the time, but it rang a little bell with me. So I went off to this meeting, and with all sincerity, as innocent as a soul can be, I raised my hand and I said, I'd like to know when you think human life begins, because that makes all the difference on how we write these letters. And they said, shut up, sit down. We don't need your kind here. And I said, I don't know what my kind is. It's funny to say, but everybody at that time was trying to look like John Lennon, and girls as well as guys. And I had managed it as well as anyone else. I had long, straggly black hair and wire rim glasses, and we were all dressing in a unisex fashion. And I was just, combat boots and jeans and flannel shirts. And I looked around the room. I said, I've been doing my best to look like everybody else here. I'm talking to myself. So I don't know what they mean by your kind. And they said, we don't need you right to lifers. Well, of course, I'd never heard of a right to lifer because I didn't know what abortion was. So I left that meeting really sort of shell-shocked at their unwillingness to answer a question that was fundamental to the whole issue. I was neither pro-abortion or against abortion. I was just starting to think it through. And it was a small campus, and people would come up to me and they kept asking me, well, here, you're against abortion. Why are you against abortion? I said, I don't know if I am. But, so in the dialogue with people, I became more and more against abortion. Then in 1972, when Roe versus Wade came down, I actually remember hearing it on the radio that abortion had been made legal. And I was kind of shocked. It didn't make a huge impact on me, but I said, oh boy, it's happening. Then years later, from 68, honestly, to about 75, I didn't think much about abortion. And then I went off to graduate school in Toronto. And I was just a new graduate student there and trying to read everything and get a sense of the lay of the land. And I saw the name of a professor there who had also graduated from Grinnell College. And I knew him by reputation from Grinnell, so I gave him a call. We went out to lunch, and somehow abortion came up. And he said, oh, I'm very involved in the pro-life movement. I said, pro-life movement? He said, yeah. And he said, you should join. And I thought, I should. I'm totally against abortion. So I got on my bike and I drove to the road to the Right to Life office in Toronto. And I thought, well, I'm going to be a teacher. I think I'll volunteer to be a speaker. Then for years, I spoke regularly in the schools in Toronto. They would regularly have a pro-abortion person one week and a pro-lifer. Really, they started with pro-lifers and then brought the pro-abortion people in. But they had to flip it because the pro-abortion people wouldn't come after the pro-lifers came because we armed the students with such strong arguments. So for years I did that. And I was constantly regularly asked the question, well, what about contraception? Are you opposed to contraception too? And I would make the routine argument that some forms of contraception work by causing early term abortions. But I said they're completely two different issues. And then, I won't stop unless you interrupt me. So if you want to interrupt me,
no, because I want to actually acknowledge your voice as kind of a predecessor to this whole thing. You had firsthand experience. But here's what I want to do. It's a twofold question. Where do you think the degradation of society has? Can you almost outline how society has just degraded to the point where now they're even talking about killing children, even up until the point of death? And then including some of your work as a person who has been very critical, appropriately so, against the contraceptive mentality. Those two things actually go together. I'd like to hear a little review of history of that, if you don't mind.
Well, my history is a little bit tied into that in my
Yes,
whole sort of
I've
epiphany
heard your
on
talks. Yes.
yeah yeah, and I had I started doing sidewalk counseling outside of abortion clinic when I was a professor at Notre Dame, and there was all these young women coming to the abortion clinic, and I'm talking to them, and all of a sudden you get this epiphany. The reason they're having abortions is because they're in relationships that are not ready for a baby. A pregnancy happens and it's a crisis, and then abortion becomes the solution to the problem. And I thought, what did this? What has made them think it makes any kind of sense to be having sex if you're not prepared for a baby? It hit me, it was contraception. And I had studied with friends. I'd studied Humanae Vitae in graduate school and come to see the sense of it. And all of a sudden, I was no longer thinking there's a contraception, abortion are two different issues. I'm thinking really they're closely related. And then as I learned more about contraception and abortion, as you say, even philosophy, just seeing that contraception was an incredible blow the understanding of the world and the understanding of the human person. There, and someone asked me the other day, what's the huge gulf between, let's say, the church on matters and the rest of the world? And the church believes that the world is good, that God created a beautiful universe, and that along with, I can use Aristotelian terms, that everything has an end and that or a purpose, and that end or purpose is good. And that our job in this world is to learn what those purposes are and to bring about the best that can come out of everything that exists. And knowing that it's already got within it an inner dynamism towards what is good, and that God has made a beautiful world, a good world, and He wants us to live in accord with that, and we'll get the best out of everything when we live in accord with it. So the church has always taught, and not that it picked it out of the air somewhere, but taught that the purpose of the sexual act has two ends, and it has these ends not because we assign these ends to the sexual act, but it has it by its very nature, much in the same way we don't assign to tomato plants that they're meant to produce tomatoes, or to vegetable seeds that they're lettuce seeds that they're meant to produce lettuce. It's written into the very nature of things. So when the church says that the purpose of sex is to create union, a deep, intimate, profound, committed, lifetime union between a male and a female, and it's meant to bring forth through that act, that union of love and commitment, it's meant to bring forth new human souls, new human beings. And that's a given. That's something that we didn't assign, we didn't make up. It's something there, and we recognize it as being good. Whereas the modern world tends to think of it's almost back to it is back to the sin of Adam and Eve. We want to be gods. We want to make the world. We don't want to live in God's world. We want to live in our world. So we want to make everything over into whatever we currently think is beneficial for us.
Well, Professor Smith,
Yeah.
but if you were to take a look at maybe points in history from that time you were starting to really pay attention, the church's teachings are right, what were some significant historical things that happened? Obviously, the secular revolution was one of them. But are there other things that you've seen as not just a student in the books, but a disciple of culture? What are some of the things that we need to be paying attention to? Because I want parents and families to be paying attention to whether or not these forces are entering into the ambit of your children's formation and their
Yeah.
formation of their conscience.
Well, of course, this was a long time ago now, and we always have to be careful that we're not fighting the battles of the past. I mean, my
Okay.
poor parents, they grew up in a time when they could go off to college, and there were curfews at 10 at night, and um, males weren't allowed in female dorms, and there was, everybody's outside kissing goodnight before the curfew came down. And when they sent us off to school, they had no idea we were going to be into a den of iniquity, of sex and drugs and drink and just wild behavior. They had no preparation for this. So unfortunately, that's still true. When parents are sending their children off to university, they have to realize they're sending them into dens of iniquity. They probably went to such colleges themselves. So they have to prepare them for this, that they're going to get there. And if they're anything like me, it's sort of like, well, I want to think things through all over again. Luckily now you have phones and you can call and text. I could talk to my parents once a week. Sunday night, you get a 5-minute call was very expensive, and you couldn't talk more than 5 minutes. So I didn't have the presence of my family in my life, my parents, which I think would have done me a lot of good for keeping me on the straight and narrow. But the 1960s were almost as crazy as the times now. There's nothing as crazy quite as the times right now. But I mean, feminism was a huge thing. That men and women were equal, and that women needed to be in the workforce in order to have any kind of dignity, self-esteem. That staying at home and having babies was demeaning to women. So contraception was considered to be an enormous liberation point for women.
So
You agree?
you're naming some things, and I like it. So first and foremost, parents, be very attentive to where you're sending your kids to school. You know that they're going to run into these issues, so you've got to, as she said, you have the method to communicate with them. Do it more regularly, and also to be able to define terms that they're going to be hearing, like feminism, understanding, what that word really means, and giving a good understanding so that your children can understand that feminism isn't supposed to compete with masculinity. But Professor Smith, for you as a professor, in your history and teaching, there would be some things that I'm sure your students would ask you just to kind of trip you up and say, well, what about contraception for people who know that they love each other, but they can't afford a baby? And it's a responsible thing to do to not have a baby in this situation. And then you'll always bring this, the people bring up, and what about AIDS in Africa? I'd like to hear some of the apologetics, and then maybe just outline some of the thought process, so that when people are listening, are going to respond to those very questions. They don't sound like know-it-alls, but they sound like
Yeah,
compassionate people who have thought through this conundrum.
right. Well, unfortunately, our culture has big thinks of sex as being something that's just for pleasure. And that's where you can do it anytime with anyone for any purpose. And as long as you're getting pleasure in any way, etc., it's fine. Now, the church is certainly not against pleasure, probably as much as for pleasure as almost any place on the face of the earth. Lots of feasting in the Catholic Church. As a matter of fact, the church likes for spouses to have sex. It's something that creates union, and it creates babies. But if for some reason it's not beneficial for the family, for the husband and the wife to have a child at a particular time, the church says there's no problem in limiting your family size. It's how you do it. Do you do it in a way in which you're trying to engage in an act and then sort of undo that act by contracepting, engaging in an act that has its very purpose, fertility, and removing the fertility from the act? Or do you respect that act and use what is called natural family planning? There are many different methods of natural family planning, but this word natural should have some some force in our culture. To go to the grocery store, what do you see everywhere? Organic vegetables, organic fruit. We're working on, trying really to get all these GMO vegetables out of our way, because it fills the body with alien chemicals. Well, there's few things that are as alien to a woman's system than the chemicals that are in the chemical contraceptives. They radically change a woman's being. We have these chemicals in our system. God gave it to them. Again, God made the world good. And even the hormones that women have serve certain purposes. They serve to attract males, among other things. And that when women are taking the chemical contraceptives, they're suppressing their own natural hormones and putting in their bodies hormones that are synthetic, are not natural at all. And so they're changing their very makeup. And when we change our makeup, we perceive the world differently, and people perceive us differently. So there's all sorts of, when my talk of contraception, why not, and my talk hormones or us, I explain a lot how women who are in a state of pseudo pregnancy don't have that same chemical attraction to males. Males are much more attracted to women who are having fertile cycles than those who are not. Now, using natural family planning requires people to be able to identify the fertile part of the cycle, and we're getting better and better at that. We have different monitors that help women determine their fertility. Women can read the signs of their own body, and then to abstain during that time. Now, abstaining is not easy. Most good things in this world are not. Exercise, study, saving money, all of these things are challenging. But almost all of us will say is insofar as we build those good habits, we're better off.
Well, you're encouraging people to actually be disciplined and to be educated and to make sure that the man understands the woman's body, which is sometimes limiting the contraceptive act to just a woman taking a pill. But some people will say, well, what about giving condoms to men, especially for AIDS in Africa? Now, obviously, uh, this is going to be a different take because now it's the man taking responsibility for the contraceptive act, still the same effect. You're basically neutralizing the ability of fruitfulness. So, how would you say that? Is there any good reason for people to be using the pill or prophylactin?
When you talk about, say, the condom for the male or the diaphragm for the female, these are actually the category that they fit into is quite interesting. They're called the barrier method. It's a very interesting thing to say you want to make love, but you've got to get your barrier in place. Males don't like using condoms. They don't have the same experience of sex. They don't have the same tactile experience. They're not good for women either. There is a way in which the semen, as it's deposited in a woman's vagina, actually brings proteins with it that are very calming for a woman. They give her a sense of tremendous sense of well-being. And so again, God has made our bodies that, in fact, exchanging these bodily fluids, having this tactile experience that isn't interfered with by synthetic plastics. You're basically making love to the plastic more than you're making love to your spouse. And of course, all you hear all the time is that contraceptives, that condoms, are not that reliable. Use a double backup. Use the backup because condoms are not that reliable. Well, believe me, if they're not reliable for stopping conception, they're not reliable for stopping the spread of AIDS. And it's the same sort of thing that one knows when there's an outbreak of sexually transmitted diseases. If someone has AIDS, I've seen the commercials on TV. The young man says, well, we now know that one of us is a carrier, and we know when we're having this outbreak, and then we abstain. And I'm thinking that's wonderful. That is the right thing to do. So you using contraception during the sexual act. I'd much rather say the marital act, because it's only spouses who should be having sex, so it should be called the marital act. Spouses have a whole lifetime to make love, and I'd rather say make love than to say have sex. Spouses have a
Sure.
whole lifetime to make love.
But you're saying something that requires that couple or the people engaging the sexual act to have a spirituality, an understanding of the spirit that is
Right.
communicated even in that marital act. So if you are watching this, we're trying to encourage a spiritual formation, a spiritual understanding of the sexual act, and not just simply pure science, which is always on the side of being more natural, organic in the sexual act. Now, Professor Smith, you've been teaching from an academic point of view. What I'd like to do is give you a chance to speak to the domestic church in the very most practical way. How do
Mhm.
parents talk to their kids about sex and contraception and all of this stuff that is no longer about birds and bees? It's a war. It is an all-out war. Talk to the
Mhm.
parents who are dealing with children at different age levels so that they can put your words into practice.
To some extent, I think the very young children and young teenagers are the most important ones to talk to, and to make it not, sit down and have a talk. It's to talk all the time. I love your father. I can't believe has given me such a wonderful man. And I really believe in this notion that you shouldn't have sex with anybody but your husband or your wife. And how happy we are to have had children. If you're blessed with many, say, so blessed to have so many children. Or, we haven't been able to have a large number of children, but we're so grateful for those that we have. And we understand what a great gift is, this love between husband and wife. And to talk this way, and just to talk about, with sadness in your voice, about children who are in divorced households, and say, children need a mother and a father who are there with them till they die. And that we want to do everything we can and following the church's teaching on sexuality. And you might, as they get older, you might say, we made some mistakes. I made some mistakes in my life and I deeply regret it. I wish that I had always followed the church's teaching and not made those mistakes, because now I carry certain baggage with me that I wish I didn't have and I don't want my children to have. And to point out, say, do you see this young man over there? Do you see how he reacts with people? See how he interacts with his parents and his little sisters and other people? I think that's the kind of guy you want to marry someday. Or that's the kind of girl. Look at the way that she is with people and get them thinking that they're going to get married someday, or be, of course, join a religious order or be a single. But the whole notion is that to look to the future and planning your future and not just go out there and have sex. It's not like a rite of passage. And to think from day one, you're going to be a parent someday. What kind of person do you want to marry? What kind of home do you want to be? What kind of parent do you want to be? I've actually found that to be an effective way of counseling outside of an abortion clinic. When you ask either the young man or the young woman, you can say, did you ever think you're going to be a parent someday? And they go, yeah. And I said, it's a wonderful thing. Are you thinking of teaching your kid to play musical instrument or sports, or take them to the park, your little girl, take her to the swing, get this in their head, and then you say, to the man, if your girlfriend is pregnant, you're already a father. You're a father of the
One
baby
of
that's in there. And that
It's
baby needs to be,
absolutely beautiful,
you know,
beautiful, because what a
and
lot of people do is they sometimes look at the pro-life movement and they see it as a legal thing and as an academic thing, an academic discipline. But it really, for those who are watching, we're trying to make this personal. What Professor Smith was saying she was basically saying, speak from your heart. Allow the natural good things and even the honesty from your heart about faith, about family, about sexuality. Start talking to your children about it. Stop with the drama and just start talking from your heart. It will certainly help them. But Professor Smith, I just want to know, has there been a situation where the teachings of the church made you think, well, maybe abortion or contraception could possibly be helpful? I want to try to get into into the intellectual capacity of your brain and say, would there be any situation or uh, 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 like something that could happen that, in your mind, from a scientific point of view, would say it would be okay? And you certainly can say no, not at all. But I kind of want to hear what your thoughts are, because I
you,
know a lot of
you can
people are thinking, well, aren't there
yeah.
opportunities? Shouldn't there be reasons why we can use contraception? Shouldn't there be reasons why we can have abortion? What would you say to that?
Well, you mentioned scientific ones. For me, the sociology ones, or sociological ones, they might say, are the more pressing. I mean, I helped at a pregnancy care center in South Bend, Indiana, for a period of time. And one day I was hearing about a young woman who came in. She was 19 and she was on her third unwed pregnancy. All right. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, how many unwed pregnancies are there going to be? Just thinking, like, get a good contraceptive, and break away from this. And then I thought, I'm just giving her another shove into the culture of sex with no preparation for babies. And instead of taking whatever time we have with that young woman, again, to love her, tell her that God loves her, God loves any baby that she's carrying, God is going to try to help her and help her through us. We're here to help her. And that to give her a whole different message, that she needs to be loved, the baby needs to be loved. If you give them a contraceptive, that's just like giving your kid the key to the liquor cabinet. It's sort of like don't drink at the bar, but drink at home. Well, it's not going to last long. Before long, your kids are going to be off at some camp somewhere, drinking and driving and dead. Um, and so it's all I've over time. Of course, I've had those thoughts. People will call me with the worst possible scenarios. If a woman been married for 10 years, has 4 kids, she was sexually abused when she was young, and sex is quite traumatic for her. And her husband's a wonderful man, but they have to go for a long period of time abstaining. And couldn't they use contraception? And even as I hear this woman just even asking the question, I said, you have a conscience. And the fact that you're asking suggests that you're not comfortable with this at all, that you want somebody else to convince you that this is okay. And I said, you seem to be a person of integrity. And it just seems to me this is a challenge for you and your husband to figure out how you can become comfortable with this act, because the chances are over a period of time, you'll feel used. You'll feel like I had to use a contraceptive, or I had him use a contraceptive because um, if we're not having sex, he's not really committed to this relationship. I mean, one of the most I say epiphanies I had was once I was talking about AIDS, and this was in the early '90s, and people were saying, "Oh, suppose the person I love has AIDS. Should we get married? Can we ever have sex?" And this woman came up to me, and she was an older woman, and she said, "These kids know nothing about love." I said, "Tell me." And she said, "I've been married for I don't know how many years." She said, "But early in our marriage, we had two children, and then I had a very serious kidney infection. And the doctor told me I should not get pregnant until the kidney infection cleared up. It could be lethal for me." So she said, I went home to my husband and I said, we have to practice, at this time it was just rhythm, very carefully, so I don't get pregnant and don't die. And he said, he said, rhythm hell. He said, we're not having sex until you're better. He said, why would I want to do anything to jeopardize your life? He said, I want you. And so she said they abstained for 4 years until her condition cleared up. And then she asked a question. She says, what do you think the quality of our marriage has been? You know, it was just a beautiful thing. She says, does that man love me or what? And people have to realize life is probably going to require long stages of abstinence. One of the other spouses could be sick. One of the other spouses could be on business or in the military. And during that time, what are you going to do? All right. And it seems to me you have to say, the sex is in service of love. And if love requires abstaining, it's also a very profound statement of love. I mean, how many times if a spouse says, I'm tired or whatever, and the other spouse says, okay, honey, I'll go watch the basketball game. That's an act of love. And she feels loved by that. And if he says it in love rather than in resentment and anger, but if he says, I understand, honey, there'll be another time. You go to sleep, you need some rest. I'll clean up the kitchen, even better, right? And probably tomorrow night she's going to feel a lot more like it than she does tonight if she's had this show of love.
That may be
So
you
those
just
are
projecting that you have to. You might just be projecting that you've got to wash dishes or something, Professor Smith. I'm not sure, but you're exactly right. What I appreciate about this is we bring this to a close, and I'm just going to summarize it because there was too much in there for someone to get everything they needed in one sitting. Which is why if you do get the VIP pass, you'll have access to not only this presentation, but 50 plus other 20 plus hours of formation for you to be not only educated, but formed in being more effective thinkers and then communicators and livers of the pro-life movement. Not liver like liver that you fry, but livingprolife.com. And so I want to encourage you to make sure that you didn't hear this just once, but you're letting it replay in your head so that it can provide formation. I loved how her educational, erudite approach to studying this also becomes very practical. So please don't
mhm.
think you have to have a doctorate to be a pro-life witness. You just have to be a believer and someone who is being discipled by God. And so please make sure you go and order the VIP pass, or if you're in charge of a parish, get the premium pass, and you can get access so you can share with all your parishioners. But what I'd like to do is give Professor Smith the final word. Any final thoughts, and then where can people reach you and learn more about your very
Yeah.
important mission and ministry?
Well, I think you did put up my website, and there you can get a free download of my contraception. Why not? And I'm gradually getting all my other talks up there for free. Getting old enough, I just want to give them away. But I think you're right. I mean, often being overly educated is actually an impediment to talking to people. It certainly was for me when I started doing action outside of an abortion clinic, I started getting into arguments about when life began and the right to life and all sorts of stuff. And less educated people, more holy people, educated me that you had to start with love. And you approach a woman and not sort of like, when do you think human life begins? You approach a woman and say, I'm here because God loves you. And he sent me here to have a conversation with you. And just start, and if you're pregnant, I want you to know he loves you and he loves your baby. And you're the only person right now who can care for that baby. And I want to help you do that. If there's anything I can do to help you care for that baby, I want to help you find the resources. And that, if you ask them, do you believe in God? It's amazing how many believe in God. Do you believe in God? Yes. Yes, I do believe in God. Well, believe me, God loves you and he loves life and he loves this baby. It's very profound. Instead of getting into any kind of an argument, pray for the woman. If she even says going for abortion, we'll say, before you go, could I just say a prayer for you? And then say a prayer. And, who knows? But that's a much better approach than the so-called educated approach.
Fantastic. Coming from the professor herself, learn more about her at janetsmith.org. And as always, I want to thank our special guests, all of the panelists that we've had for tonight, Professor Janet Smith, and all of you listening and watching, and more importantly, being formed in your faith so that you can be more effective in responding with love and with faith, and also with formed information on how to be a true witness and living the pro-life message. As such, we want to encourage you to share this message far and wide. And please know that all of us working behind the scenes for this are going to be praying for all of you as we invoke God's blessings upon all of us here, all those watching, and the pro-life movement. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. And go forth
Amen.
and proclaim the good news by your lives. Thanks be to God.